At exactly 5:42 a.m., the sun had just broken the horizon over the Philippine Sea. Yellow-shirted flight directors walked the deck. Steam drifted from the No. 2 catapult. A flight of FA-18 Super Hornets, each costing $67 million, sat chained to the deck. Their engines were cold. The ship was moving at a slow, easy pace of 12 knots. Inside the bridge, the mood was calm. Officers held cups of coffee. They looked at screens showing blue water for miles. The nearest land was the tiny island of Okidaitō, over 200 miles to the north. The carrier strike group was spread out. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Benfold and the USS Higgins, were sailing 5 miles ahead. They were the shield. Their radars swept the sky every few seconds. Everything was quiet. The data links were green. The threat board was empty. But 1,400 miles to the west, that was about to change. Deep in the arid plains of Inner Mongolia, a heavy garage door rolled up. It was 4:12 a.m. local time. A massive 10-wheeled transporter truck drove out onto a concrete pad. On its back, it carried a white missile. This was the DF-17. It didn't look like a normal rocket. The tip wasn't a cone. It was a flat, sharp wedge. This was a hypersonic glide vehicle. The crew inside the truck worked fast. They typed in coordinates, they checked the hydraulics. The missile raised up, pointing straight at the sky. There was no warning, no hotline call to Washington, no notice to airmen. At 5:14 a.m., the rocket motor ignited. Dust kicked up for hundreds of feet. The ground shook. The missile screamed upward, turning the dark desert night into day. In seconds, it was gone. It punched through the clouds, climbing higher and higher. Back on the Ronald Reagan, a radar operator took a sip of lukewarm coffee. His screen showed nothing but friendly aircraft. He didn't know that a weapon moving at Mach 5 was already halfway up the atmosphere. The DF-17 shed its first stage. The booster rocket fell away. Now, only the wedge-shaped glider remained. It didn't keep going up into space like a normal ballistic missile. It pushed its nose down, it leveled out. It was surfing the edge of the atmosphere. At 5:18 a.m., the Space Force station in Buckley, Colorado got the first ping. The space-based infrared system, satellites that watch for heat, saw the bloom. A red light flashed on a console. A sergeant looked at the data. The heat signature was massive, but the trajectory was wrong. It was too flat. It wasn't going to space. It was staying low. "Launch detected," the voice said over the secure line. "Source, mainland China, bearing east." The data flashed to the Pentagon, then to Hawaii, then to the Ronald Reagan. On the bridge of the carrier, a secure phone buzzed. The captain picked it up. His face went tight. He listened for 5 seconds, then he hung up. "General quarters," he said. His voice was calm but fast. "General quarters, this is not a drill." The alarm blared. Bong, bong, bong. Sailors woke up from their bunks. On the flight deck, the yellow shirts stopped walking. They looked up at the island tower. They knew that sound. Inside the Combat Direction Center, the dark room where they fight the ship, the screens changed. The blue water map was covered in red lines. The tactical action officer looked at the big screen. The SPY-1 radars on the destroyers were searching. They pushed their beams out to the horizon. "Where is it?" someone asked. "No track," the radar operator said. "I have no track." This was the problem. A normal missile flies high like a baseball thrown to the outfield. You can see it coming from miles away, but this missile, the glider, was flying low. It was hiding behind the curve of the Earth. The radar couldn't see it. The satellites could see the heat, but they couldn't give a perfect lock. "Time to impact?" the captain asked. "Unknown," the officer said. "Projected speed is Mach 7, maybe Mach 9. Mach 9 is 6,900 miles per hour. That is nearly 2 miles every second. The distance readout on the satellite feed dropped 1,000 miles, then 900, then 800. The tension in the room was heavy. It felt like gravity had increased. "Is it targeting us?" the captain asked. "Unclear," the intelligence officer said. "Trajectory puts it in our sector, but it's maneuvering." That was the terrifying part. The glider wasn't falling, it was flying, it had small fins, it could turn, it could weave, it could change its target at the last second. If they fired their interceptor missiles now, they might miss. The standard SM-6 missiles are designed to hit things that fall in a predictable line. They struggle to hit things that bob and weave like a boxer, and if they fired, they would be shooting at a Chinese test vehicle. That could start World War III. But if they didn't fire and it hit the ship, the carrier would be gone. A hypersonic impact at that speed doesn't need explosives. The kinetic energy alone, the sheer force of the hit, would crack the ship in half. The captain had to make a choice. He had incomplete data. He had a weapon he couldn't track. He had 5,000 lives on board. The distance readout flashed, 650 miles. "Emergency breakaway," the captain ordered. "Hard to starboard, flank speed." The helm officer grabbed the wheel. "Aye, sir, right full rudder." The 100,000-ton steel city leaned. It wasn't a gentle turn. It was a violent shove. On the flight deck, the chains on the F-18s pulled tight. The landing gear groaned. A tractor slid 3 feet to the right. Inside the galley, trays of breakfast crashed to the floor. The ship vibrated. The 4 giant screws under the water churned up a massive white wake. The Ronald Reagan was trying to sprint, but a ship moves at 35 miles per hour. The missile was moving at 6,000. "New track," the radar officer on the USS Benfold shouted. The glider had popped up. It does this to check its position. It climbed just high enough for the ship's radar to see it. "Signature confirmed," the officer said. "High-velocity object, range 300 miles, closing fast." The screen showed a red dot. It was moving terrifyingly fast across the display. 2 minutes to impact, the officer said. The captain watched the screen. The red dot was heading for their original position, the place they were 5 minutes ago. The glider adjusted. It banked left. It was correcting its course. It was looking. "Is it locking on?" the captain whispered. The air defense commander held his hand over the firing key. The cover was flipped up. He was ready to launch a wall of missiles. He just needed the word. "Range 150 miles, the readout said. "Altitude 90,000 feet. The object was glowing hot. The friction of the air made it burn at 3,000 degrees. It was a meteor made by man. 1 minute, the voice said. The ship was still turning. The deck was tilted 15 degrees. The horizon was crooked. Range 80 miles. The red dot on the screen started to dive. It pitched down. It was entering the terminal phase. This is the death dive. "Sir, trajectory is shifting," the tracker said. It's passing us. It's passing aft." The captain didn't breathe. 30 seconds. The red dot screamed past the center of the screen. It wasn't aiming for the ship. It was aiming for the water behind them. 10 seconds. Sailors on the aft deck, the back porch of the ship, looked up. They didn't see the missile. It was too fast. They heard a double crack, a sonic boom that hit them in the chest like a hammer. Boom, boom. Then a massive geyser of water erupted 10 miles behind the ship. It shot hundreds of feet into the air. The splashdown was violent. White foam and steam rose up where the weapon hit the sea. "Impact," the radar officer said. "Splashdown confirmed. No explosion." Silence returned to the bridge. The vibration of the turn was still there, but the threat was gone. The captain let out a breath. "Rudder amidships," he said. "Steady course 090. The ship slowly leveled out. The trays in the galley stopped sliding. The jets on the deck settled back onto their shocks. The captain looked at the timestamp. It was 5:32 a.m. The whole event had lasted less than 20 minutes. The Ronald Reagan was safe. No paint was scratched. No one was hurt. But the mood in the Combat Direction Center was dark. They analyzed the data tapes immediately. The flight path of the Chinese missile was overlaid on the map. It had flown 1,400 miles. It had maneuvered around the radar coverage of Taiwan. It had stayed under the view of the long-range scanners. And it had landed exactly where the carrier group would have been if they hadn't moved. Was it a miss or was it a message? The intelligence officers looked at the avoidance window. This is the area a ship needs to move out of to be safe. With a normal ballistic missile, you know where it will land minutes before it hits. You can move the ship 2 or 3 miles and the missile hits the water. But with this hypersonic glider, the avoidance window was huge. Because the missile could turn, the ship would have to move 20 or 30 miles to be safe. And a carrier cannot move 20 miles in 5 minutes. The math didn't look good. Later that afternoon, the flight deck operations resumed. The F-18s launched. The steam catapults hissed. The noise of freedom returned to the Pacific. To the naked eye, the USS Ronald Reagan was still the king of the ocean. It was massive, powerful, and undefended. But every officer on that bridge knew the truth. They had reacted to a test. They had been forced to turn their ship by a weapon that didn't even have a warhead. The tactical reality had shifted. For 70 years, the U.S. Navy owned the blue water. They could park a carrier anywhere they wanted. Now, there was a zone of denial, a bubble where the cost of entry was unknown and the missile cost about $15 million. The carrier cost $13 billion. The attack was simulated. The danger was real. This wasn't just a splash in the ocean. It was the sound of a door closing on an era of undisputed dominance. The sun continued to rise over the Pacific. The waves rolled on, but the ocean felt a lot smaller than it did yesterday.